Hello, it's Russ from YumDM here again to talk about another issue of D12 Monthly. That's D12 Monthly. This one is issue 47 for May 2025, and it is all about treasure and loot. Now, this is the first of a trilogy of treasure issues. The first one, this one, will be all about just general treasure and loot, and some ideas around that, a lot of tables. The second one, issue 48, will be that will be all about magical treasure, and identifying magic items, and then understanding the various types of magic items, cursed, corrupted, and all that sort of stuff. The last one, Beyond All That Glitters, is what it's called at the moment. That one will be about probably mostly about how monsters and other creatures and races see treasure and how and why they hoard it, and um, alternatives to the usual treasure that adventurers think of, which is generally coins, gems, jewelry, all that stuff that is valuable to civilization and civilized cultures, civilized in inverted commas, and also to other creatures, but also just sort of beyond that, and seeing what maybe different creatures and that look at. So, but I want to talk about issue 47. There's seven feature articles in this one in the full version, and also a five, I think, familiar articles around sort of character building, solo stuff, spellcraft, all that sort of stuff. If I just wanted to shout out to this Westmarch's sort of ad that I had there. If you haven't got that, I would recommend getting it. It's very cool. And again, if you use that link, then you'll let me get a few cents from the purchase, and it'll help me out. And it won't cost you anything more. Um, but again, thanks to all my patrons who make this possible. If you want to be a patron, there's a link in the issue, and there's a link also on my website, yumdm.com. So yeah, this is all about treasure and loot, this issue. And the first article, I had to rearrange this sort of a little bit last minute when I was putting it together. The I sort of wanted to start off with sort of, I guess, your traditional treasure tables, but I wanted it to be something that most people could use no matter what sort of level or system that you're running. So I've kind of left the descriptions broad enough to be helpful, but specific enough to be helpful too, I guess. So what you do with this is basically just roll on a D12 on the treasure type table, and then figure out what it is. So say if we rolled a five, it'd be cultural relics, and then you move to the table for cultural relics, which is here, and then roll a D10. So you get a 10. It could be relics tied to a specific myth, like a hero's drinking horn, for example. So that could be part of the treasure that the PCs find that are in your treasure hoard or pile, or maybe just a random item in a dungeon or something like that that's been around for millennia. Um, and this is just a way to give more than just coins and gems. So a way to give unusual, it shouldn't be unusual, but different treasure types. So again, you could roll an 8, get clothing and accessories. And then if you go to clothing and accessories, you get, oh, where is clothing and accessories? There it is. Roll a 1, you get a cloak made of enchanted or iridescent fabric, or just some weird fabric that you've got in your own campaign world. So, you could roll a few times on this and build up some pretty interesting treasure that the PCs will have to sort of appraise, identify, and that sort of also leads into some of the other articles that I've got. And then at the end, there's just what it's worth, basically. So if you rolled, jars of preserved honey and exotic fruits, you could maybe roll a d4 and say, okay, if you roll a three, and then you roll 3d6, it's worth maybe 10 gold, something like that. So with this table, you can roll a d10. Obviously, the d10, and this is all in GP, so it gets up quite high. And you don't have to be limited by this. It's just again some suggestions. Um, And you can roll, depending on the item that you roll, you can roll a d4, a d3, a d6, a d8, or a d10. You could even expand this table into a d12 or a d20 if you really want to get up higher. And then roll that particular dice to see the amount it's worth. So it's a really good series of tables that I think will last you probably quite a while. And you can always add to these, turn these into D20 tables or whatever if you wanted to. So the next article is Whispers of Forgotten Fortune. So these are just rumors, basically, of rumors of treasure that you can just use. So I did a D30 on this one just because it fit nicely. In the double page. So if you want to roll a D30, if you don't have a D30, just roll a D3 and a D10, and then that's your D30. Yeah, so we've got, and I've used place names in my own campaign, just replace the place names. This might be a good way to kick off if you've got a solo campaign, which is a treasure seeker or something like that, that might be a nice way to kick off a solo campaign where he hears about one or two of these rumors and then decides to go off on choose one and decides to go off on a treasure hunt. It might, you can plant them amongst other rumors that you've got for your party. If you're playing a sandbox game, you sprinkle a few into your rumors table, that sort of thing. So I think that's pretty handy. Ecology of the Horde. These articles are really things that I wanted to see in treasure tables, and like most of the stuff that I do, and I create, it's stuff that I wanted, but I couldn't really find. And the when I find an item or a treasure, I immediately think, even as a player, I immediately think, oh, what's the background to this? Like, where did this come from? Like, how old is this? Like, what culture did it come from? Was it stolen? Was it whatever? So the ecology of the horde is just pretty much where this horde or part of the horde came from. So you could roll once on here, and there's a few different tables. So there's the treasure's origin, treasure's age, and then the treasure's condition. So you could just roll once for the entire horde if you wanted to, depending on how big it is, or you could just split up the horde and say, okay, the coins are fairly new, but the jewelry is really old, or I'll roll for the urns or the tapestries or whatever. So and so the original what the treasure was originally meant for is in this treasure's origin table. So it could be stolen goods. It could have been wages that were waylaid on their way to soldiers and mercenaries or laborers. They could have been an artisan's legacy, masterpieces like paintings or sculptures or musical instruments or whatever, or a bard's book of poems. Um, yeah, it could be anything. Again, they're fairly broad, but you can definitely get into specifics. And then how old they are. So, say if we rolled a d20 on this one and it's a hero's reward. So the wealth granted to a legendary figure for a great deed, now forgotten. So the deed and the hero might have been forgotten, but the hoard is not. And they might write a four, so it might be a millennia old. So relics from an ancient civilization, race, or rare and valuable. So this rumor that you heard could tie into this um, hero's reward from a ancient civilization in your world. Okay. And if you don't have one, you could just simply make one up. And then if you wanted to have the condition of that treasure, maybe it's a bit cracked, it's weathered, maybe it's partially intact, maybe it's decayed completely, maybe it's pristine. Roll and find out. Or just choose one. The next two are, I think, are fairly well. The next one's fairly short. Weight of wealth. So this is really just talking about um, trying to convince, I guess, the reader, to not patch over how the PCs get the treasure out of the dungeon or the ruin or get back to their safe house, um, or back to the town without thinking about how they're going to get the treasure. So don't handwave that stuff because there's two main reasons. One is you can do it quite easily, like I say in here. Just use an encumbrance slot system, either mine or OSE's, or whichever one you want, and it's easy. And just say, in mine, 100 coins equals one slot. So that's easy. You can carry up to your strength in slots without getting encumbered. So if you had a strength of 16, you could carry 1600, coins before you were encumbered. But then you have to get rid of all your other equipment. So, and then that leads to decision making on the PC's part. And I sort of highlight this here. Like, do the characters lose their armor and heavy weapons to carry more loot out in the first time? Do they want to carry it all at once? Do they want to leave some of it behind? Maybe just take the most valuable stuff. And that's where someone with appraisal skill or secondary skill comes in handy, or normally proficiency. Or you could just give the thief the ability to appraise things, fairly quickly, to give a rough estimation of what maybe an intelligence roll, um, to see what's the most valuable, so they can grab them first. Do they become encumbered? And then that would lead to combat and other penalties, like movement penalties, if they want to get out quick. That could cause issues. Or do they play it cautious, where they just take the most, as much as they can carry, without being encumbered, and then come back for the rest. So this gives them options. So don't hand wave this stuff, because this is quite important. Because by the time, if their town is like a day or two away, by the time they go there and back again, that's maybe 3, 4 days. Um, while they're trying to wrangle maybe a cart or some pack animals or something. What's going to happen to the treasure in that time? Now that they've cleared out the dungeon, is someone else going to move in? And then you can roll on tables to see if that happens. Um, and then the role playing. This is where the role playing comes in. If they go back to town and they try and buy mules and carts and all this, questions are going to be asked. Are they flashing their gold around that they've just acquired? Are the coins, kind of old coins, ancient coins that are worth more? Um, and so, it would raise someone's suspicion that they're not using sort of the current legal tender. And so there's a whole bunch of things where, there might not be enough pack animals or carts. As I said here, it's harvest season. The farmers might be using them, depending on how big your town or village or city is. Um, what if the thieves guild finds out about this? Um, what if the noble or the government of the day finds out about this? They want their cut, taxes. So it lends itself to a game within a game, really, if you don't hand wave that stuff. So the next one is this is quite a large article I wrote this quite a while ago for another publication, but didn't quite get it in on time. So I sort of reworked it. And it's something that I've been thinking about for a long time, and I'm glad I got a chance to put it in the zine. And that's the economics of wealth. So just sort of an overview of fantasy economics. And like I said, I'm in the article, I'm not an economist, so by any stretch of the imagination, but this gives you an idea if you wanted to just add a little bit more realism and groundedness to your games. And it answers the question of what happens in especially a small community or a small settlement. What happens when characters come with all this gold and just start spending and buying up the place? What happens to the peasants? What happens to the economy? What happens to those who are ruling over this? How do they react? That sort of thing. So it goes into a bit of detail, but not too much. And it's, talks about a little bit of inflation and how that would work, but it talks about it in very simple terms. And because I didn't want to get bogged down into too much. But basically, in medieval times, they didn't have inflation. because there was no wage growth. Everything was just the same for a very long time. Guilds would set prices. Those prices were set. That's the price you paid. That's the price um, the vendor sold it for, and it was all very tightly controlled by these guilds. Um, and so you had an economy with no real growth in price or income, but that is derailed by a whole influx of gold that the PCs will come and just spend or just bring into the economy itself. It would be like, if you think about just the government printing off all this cash all of a sudden and just injecting it into the economy, how that would crash the economy because that's how monetary policy works. You can't just print more money and expect things to be rosy. And that's the same here. You can't just inject a huge amount of money into a very fragile, small economy and expect things to be the same. So if you wanted to sort of role play this and really have effects from what your PCs do, then it could be a bit of fun depending on your group and what you think. And so there's a few things you could do. You could either ignore it completely, and that's fine, or just lean into it and figure out what would happen. And I've given some sort of gold piece limits for certain size settlements about so if it basically goes over sort of these amounts, which when once you work them out, um, yeah, things start to go awry. And I've sort of given a table of effects here where um, in sort of lowest to highest order. So inflation would happen first. So you would have an increased money supply raising prices for goods and services. And the example here would be I couldn't fit it all on the one table, so I just broke it up. The price of a meal at a tavern doubles. Common goods like lantern oil becomes prohibitively expensive. So if the PCs are buying up all the lantern oil and the torches, there's not going to be anything left for the peasants. And if there is, the prices are going to be sky high, that they just to the point where they can't afford it. So what that causes is resource scarcity and then social discontent. And then you have some sort of government intervention. And then you go into sort of a economic specialization where, craftsmen might pivot to create a high-end adventure gear like armor instead of saddle, bits and bridles and stuff. So the local armorer no longer makes that because he can make a ton more money on armor for these adventurers or weapons for these adventurers. And, what does that do for the local economy? And are the characters going to be very well liked if they cause all this sort of these issues? And then the farmers are going to complain and the peasants are going to complain to those higher up, and they're not going to be happy because the last thing they want is a peasant revolt. They want everything to stay the same and everything to be happy. The status quo was good in back then. So yeah, so that just brings in a whole nother avenue of treasure into the game where you can really role play this out. I did a quick article on mundane traps. So the next issue for Magic includes some magical traps. So I sort of did that just so, depending on what game you're playing, just a simple trap for a treasure. So in OSE, you have treasure traps and room traps. I sort of tried to keep these mostly to treasure traps, although some do include out like away from the treasure chest. And there's just some traps that I just made up, or I think I read about a couple in different places. And then of course you can, if you roll a 20, you can just choose. You can add combinations of the two. So you could have a decoy treasure chest that has a pendulum blade in it, and then the real chest maybe has, you know, nothing, or maybe just some toxic dust or something. So you can combine them if you wanted to in creative ways. The Treasure Lost article is one that I've been thinking about too. It's a real simple concept where when the party finds treasure, so say if they slay a dragon who's been hoarding, treasure for the last century, and then all of a sudden they bring back all these, crowns and gems and jewels, even money or art. That used to belong to somebody. So if you really wanted to throw a sort of spanner in the adventurer's works, you could add this sort of thing in where, okay, okay, so, say they raid an old ruined temple. Well, that temple might that the religion that temple belonged to might still be around, or it might have morphed into something else, into a more modern religion, but they still claim ownership over those items. So if they come back with, gold chalices or, silver crosses or whatever, the clergy might come and to try and recover some of those artifacts or those relics. So, depending on where your PC's got the treasure from and what the treasure is, you could easily add in some of these. And this is just a random table for people. And the last two are Fey Court owned and Dragon owned. But if you want to have a sort of a lower fantasy game, then just use a D10 because most of the others are fairly grounded. Bandit Leader, Merchant Guild, Former Adventurer, Thieves Guild, that sort of thing. So, and that they just want their treasure back. So, and then it's again the PCs get a choice, or do we just give it back and get their thanks and kudos, or do we hold on to it and sell it and get the money, but they're going to be annoyed at us. So, and how do the NPCs react? Do they ask nicely? Do they just demand the item? All that sort of stuff. So that can add a lot more decision making and role playing into your sessions. Um, Character building, a thief's dilemma. So this is uh, what is this again? I just had a mind blank. Um, oh yeah, so this is just yeah, so this is just basically about fencing items. Um, and just the unwanted attention that may bring about. So it just gives you an idea on, um, yes, you may be able to thieve things pretty quickly and easily, but do you have the connections enough to sell it without raising, suspicion? And just a few tips for the GM. Again, make treasure more than just coins because coins are just easily spent and that sort of thing. And then yeah, introduce untrustworthy merchants. So like if you're trying to sell something, do they tell the Thieves Guild? Are they part of the nobility? Will they try and climb the political ranks by using your scalp? Leverage local laws and customs. So, any items can be taxed in that particular land, and if you don't pay your taxes to the noble or to the establishment, then you're in trouble. And always try and look for hooks for further adventures. So, maybe they get in trouble by the law, but then the law wants them to do something so that they don't get thrown in jail or stoned or something like that. So now we move into the sort of regulars, the familiars. For solo, I just did a quick treasure find type table. So this is just a D20 roll. So say if you come across like an empty room with just a random piece of treasure in it. That's how can I probably use this table. Um, or yeah, probably just that. Like, I mean, you could have it on a creature or near a creature as well. But if there's a few rooms where it's just like you find some random treasure amongst the rubbish strewn chamber or whatever. And then I just roll a d20 and come up. You might get a collection of d4 scrolls. You might get a heavy ring engraved with a dragon motif, likely stolen from a noble family. I've tried to add a little bit of a description to give further adventure, further sort of, I guess, hooks for further adventurers. So, say if you do find that heavy gold ring, one of the characters go back and try and find out which noble family it belongs to, if they still exist. And what does that dragon motif, what does that represent? Perhaps, and perhaps they want to find the ancestors to that treasure and try and give it back for a greater reward, maybe. Spellcraft. So I've put a bit of magic in this. So these are just scrolls as treasure. So I've just done up a table which I think sort of, I guess, kind of replaces, but you could always use it as an alternate table for random treasure. And it just sort of, lists curse scrolls, random spells for magic users and clerics of varying levels, or a combination or whatever. So what I tried to do with this table is, as I've mentioned up here, is just rolling um, various dice. So you could roll a d6 for lower levels if you wanted to do that, or a d8 from sort of mid levels, d10, or just keep it as a d20 if you want to. Or if you didn't want to throw in another curse scroll, you could roll 2d6 or 2d4 or whatever, and just use the table like that. Um, and so, so you've got options there. The other thing I sort of added in is just a bit of custom flavor. Like when you find a scroll, everyone sort of has this, parchment paper scroll that's, wound up into a scroll case, which gets pretty boring. So, maybe a scroll's made from dragon hide, maybe it's enchanted silk, maybe it's made from spider silk, or it's on obsidian slate tablet from, another civilization. Maybe its writing is magical or mystical in some way. The coloration might suggest what sort of spell it is, and there might be hidden details on it. For example, there might be a second spell, there might be a map hit with sort of invisible ink, something on the back that's magically obscured, that sort of thing. Um, The eventual location, I just sort of did a example treasure hoard for this. And it's pretty random. Like I just I think I rolled on some random tables just to sort of see, and then I sort of just created some other ones. So it's just a random hoard. It sort of probably gives you an idea of what sort of a hoard sort of looks like, and also how I've broken it down is sort of instructive in the way that you could roll for how old the treasure is, what condition it's in, that sort of thing. So you could say, the coins are just coins, or you could say maybe some of the coins maybe the silver coins are from another, era. Maybe it's from an ancient empire or something. So they might be worth more or they might be worthless. And then same with the gems and jewelry, same with the art objects. This is a good one because that could come from any time period and what condition they're in. It might have been worth, a gold chalice might have been worth 2000 when it was new, but maybe it's not worth so much because it's been damaged or weathered or broken or whatever. So that just gives you some ideas. The last one I think is the class axe, which is treasure kits. So two more kits to do with treasure. One is a fence. So if you want to have an NPC who's a fence, these are sort of the roles that he takes on, or even a PC. And it just sort of gives the sort of secondary skills that they might have. And if you want to learn more about kits, please see issue, oh, I've written it here. Yeah, issue 32 has more information about kits, and I'm pretty sure that also has information about secondary skills as well. So, and how I use those. Yeah, so special hindrances. The other one is the antiquarian kid, who sort of, yeah, knowledgeable about old things. So again, he or she can, yeah, different equipment. They've got special benefits like cultural knowledge, preservation expertise, and is known as a reputable dealer. Although they do get obsessed and their equipment is very fragile. So I've added in two new secondary skills as well from to expand on issue 32. One's an appraiser. So these guys work with merchants usually to understand the value of goods. And they can value almost any item, but they need a skill check, obviously, for some uncommon or rare items, and a petty thief. So he just grew up in the streets and just like steals fruit and bread to survive. Might pick a pocket every now and again, or that sort of thing. But it's just enough small items to stay alive. So obviously that's a good one for a thief to move into, for example. Or if you wanted to take a sort of more of a if you've got a kit in mind, that might be a good one to take if they're a thug, maybe, instead of a straight thief. And then, yeah, just basically has a skill to, yeah, just small items enough to stay alive. Maybe he's got a dagger or a knife or something that he found, or whatever. So you can use them as you like. That's it. So for this issue. Obviously, there's more on my website. The web enhancements. I've got two planned for this issue, but I'll see how I go with time. So they'll come out in June. And then I will just want to acknowledge the great cover art with the treasure stack was by Henrik Karppinen. 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 Hope I pronounced that okay. Internal art, Dean Spencer, as always, his stuff is amazing. Dago Castro, Fat Goblin Games, Houndsworks. Actually, that's a bit of a misprint. That should be before Houndworks. Oops. And yeah, and other art by Daniel F. Wolf Hall. And yeah, all the articles written by myself. I didn't have any guest posts this time, so if you want to drop me a guest post, then feel free. Support me on Patreon. The next issue will be, as I said, the second in the treasure trilogy. Will be magic items, or magic treasure, as it were. So keep an eye out for that. And this is Russ from YumDM. And as always, happy gaming.